Hello everyone. A very good day to all of you and welcome back to UGC Net English Detailed Lectures. In the previous class we discussed the biography of one of the most famous Indian English novelist R.K. Narayan. With today's lecture we are going to cover one of the most famous novels of an English novelist, Charles Dickens. The title of the novel is Hard Times. Let's begin with the title of the novel. The full title of the novel is Hard Times for These Times. Hard Times for These Times, published in 1854. Charles Dickens, 1812 to 1870. The work Hard Times for These Times was first published in 1854, and it is the shortest of Charles Dickens' novels. It does not feature the prolonged humorous or sentimental scenes that you can usually see in many of Charles Dickens' novels. The book was first published in his own weekly periodical, that is, Household Words. And this novel satirizes the social and economic conditions of the English society of the Victorian era. The novel was adapted as a 1915 silent film titled the same, that is Hard Times, and it was directed by Thomas Bentley. And it is Charles Dickens' only novel not to have scenes set in London. The novel projects the idea of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism. It is also called the philosophical radicalism, or we can say Benthamism, and it was influenced in the mid-Victorian period. It is a theory of morality that advocates actions that foster happiness and pleasure. So happiness for the highest number of people. That was the aim of the idea, the philosophical idea, that is utilitarianism. And this idea opposes actions that cause unhappiness or harm. So the idea considered everyone has the responsibility to work hard towards the attainment of happiness. But through this work, Charles Dickens actually mocks the idea of utilitarianism, and that the pursuit of happiness is possible only to those who are wealthy enough to further their ways. So Dickens is critical of the idea of utilitarianism. He says this idea is possible only to the wealthy people. The poor people are crushed by the miserable and vicious circumstances of their life. The character Thomas Gradgrind represents utilitarianism within this novel. Now let's analyze the setting of the novel. The work is set in the 1854 fictitious Victorian industrial town titled the Corktown. Now the narrator of the work, who narrates the story. The story is narrated in the anonymous point of view. The narrator speaks in the third person omniscient point of view. Now the genre of the work. It is we can call a Victorian novel, and we can call it as a realist novel. It is a satire as well, and also a dystopian novel. Now, coming to the themes projected by the novel, we can say, first of all, of course, the idea of utilitarianism, then mechanization of human beings, the opposition between fact and fancy, the importance of femininity, morality, etc. Now the divisions of the novel. The novel is mainly divided into three parts, three sections, namely sowing, reaping, and garnering. Sowing, reaping, and garnering. Now coming to the titles of the sections. The title of each book are related to Galatian words from the Bible. The words are, "For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." And the title of the first chapter is "The One Thing Needful." And the last chapter is titled "Final." The novel begins with the words, "Now, what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life." And the novel ends with the words, "We shall sit with lighter bosoms on the hearth to see the ashes of our fires turn grey and cold." Now let's analyze the critics' thoughts on the novel. First of all, John Ruskin, who declared Hard Times to be his favorite work among all of Dickens' works. This was due to the work's exploration of important social questions. Next, we have the critic Thomas Macaulay, who branded the work, who didn't like the work, so he called it a sullen socialism, on the grounds that Dickens did not fully comprehend the politics of the time. Now, George Bernard Shaw, who argued that Hard Times to be a novel of passionate revolt against the whole industrial order of the modern world. F.R. Lewis, in his work The Great Tradition, described the book as essentially a moral fable. Now let's analyze the characters of the work. First of all, we have the main character who is Mr. Thomas Gradgrind, who is a school bar superintendent. We can call him as a business entrepreneur. Then we have his wife, Mrs. Gradgrind. Then we have Thomas Gradgrind's friend, who is Josiah Bounderby. Josiah Bounderby, who is a business associate of Mr. Gradgrind. Then we have the children of the Gradgrind. The Gradgrind's children. First of all, we have Louisa. Louisa, also called the Lou Gradgrind. And later she marries Bounderby, and after that her name is changed to Louisa Bounderby. She is the eldest child of the Gradgrind family. Then we have Tom or Thomas Gradgrind, who is the second child of the Gradgrinds. Then we have Jane Gradgrind, who is the younger sister of Tom and Louisa. Then we have Mr. Sleary, who is the owner of a circus group. Then we have Sissy Jupe, also called Cecilia Jupe, who is a circus girl of Sleary's circus, as well as a student of Thomas Gradgrind. So Sissy is a student of Thomas Gradgrind and a friend of Thomas Gradgrind's children, Louisa and Tom. Then we have Bitzer. Bitzer is a classmate of Sissy, Tom and Louisa. Then we have Stephen Blackpool. Stephen Blackpool is a worker at one of Bounderby's mills. Then we have Rachel, Rachel is the friend of Stephen Blackpool. Then we have Mrs. Parsit, who is the housekeeper of Bounderby. Mrs. Parsit is a widow. Then we have a James Harthouse, who is an upper-class gentleman. And James Harthouse flirts with Louisa. Then we have a Mrs. Pegler. Mrs. Pegler is an old woman who sometimes visits Cogtown to observe the Bounderby estate. She is later revealed to be Bounderby's mother. Now let's move to the summary of the work. Thomas Gradgrind, a wealthy merchant, is an academic supervisor who believes in facts and all work with no play. So his idea is projecting facts. Facts only matters in life. That is the slogan of Thomas Gradgrind. Early in the story, he is shown quizzing his students on facts. He calls his students by the assigned numbers instead of the real names. Gradgrind has two children, Louisa and Tom, studying in the school. He has, we know, three children in total, but two of his children, Louisa and Tom, studies with the circus girl, Sissy. So now we know that Gradgrind's children, Louisa and Tom, they grow up, all work and no play. So Louisa and Tom become interested in the circus and are seen looking at the one in town. That means a circus is going on in town and they always look forward to go and experience it. But the father is very bothered by this fact and discusses his concern with his friend Mr. Bounderby. So we know that Mr. Bounderby, who is the friend of Mr. Gradgrind. Bounderby thinks Sissy, that means Gradgrind's kid's classmate, is to blame for the children's interest in the circus because her father works there. So Sissy's father is also a circus art performer. So Gradgrind is really upset over his children's love towards circus. So Gradgrind and Bounderby attempted to remove Sissy from school because they see her as a problem. But then they discover that her father has disappeared. Disappeared from the circus? That means he has abandoned her. So Gradgrind then invites Sissy to live with his family and she agrees to do so only until her father comes back. Now Sissy spends her time at Gradgrind's home with his wife, Mrs. Gradgrind. Now Mr. Bounderby wants to marry Louisa Gradgrind, and she agrees to it, even though she does not love him. So we can imagine Bounderby is an old man. He is about 50 years old, but Louisa is only 16. But they marry, and Bounderby often makes people in town believe that he was a self-made man and he grew up poor. That was the image he was trying to project before the public. But this story of Bounderby ended up being false, as his true mother, who was Mrs. Pegler, who was later revealed. Meanwhile, a man named James Harthouse pursues Louisa and has fun flirting with her. So Louisa also takes an interest on the man, James Harthouse, and they flirt. Harthouse is an aspiring politician. Mr. Bounderby's housekeeper, Mrs. Parsett, sees Louisa and Harthouse together and overhears their plots to be together. So she reports her findings to Louisa's husband, Mr. Bounderby. Now, Louisa, who is guilty, comes and confesses her feelings, her sins to her father, and reveals her general unhappiness in the marriage with Mr. Bounderby. Now, Mr. Gradgrind shares that he regrets how he raised his children so strictly and without time for play and imagination. Meanwhile, Sissy blames Harthouse for Louisa's pain and unhappiness, and Sissy successfully convinces Harthouse also to leave the town. So we know that Harthouse was flirting with Louisa. So after finding out the truth, Sissy forces Harthouse to leave the town so that Louisa will get a peaceful life. After that, we have another character who is Stephen Blackpool, who is a worker in Bounderby's factory. So Stephen Blackpool lives in the poor part of the town, that is Cocktown, and he wants a divorce from his wife, who is an alcoholic. So his wife is an alcoholic, and Blackpool works at a Bounderby's factory and confides his troubles to him. So Blackpool, who approaches Bounderby and tells what bothers him at his home because he has an alcoholic wife. Blackpool is also in love with Rachel, who works with him in the factory. So Blackpool loves a woman, Rachel, who is a co-worker of him. But Mr. Bounderby affirms to Blackpool that only the rich can afford to divorce, so he must accept the state of his life and stay unhappy married. When Mr. Bounderby's bank was robbed, Bounderby believes that the robber was Stephen Blackpool. Soon after, people find Blackpool from an old mine. He pleads that he was not responsible for the robbery. Blackpool dies shortly after discovered. So this man, our character Stephen Blackpool, who is accused of robbing the bank, dies. So he dies, and soon after, the other characters, they discover that the real bank robber is Tom Gradgrind, who was in debt from gambling and drinking too much. So Tom, who led a very bad life, constantly gambling and drinking too much. So because of this, he had to get money, and in order to find a way, he robs the bank. And Tom's family convinces him to travel with the circus to get out of the town. But Tom dies on the trip. So towards the end of the novel, we can see the character Sissy, who is the character from the circus group. Then she marries and has children. She raises them with her fanciful view of the world, because she is totally convinced that the world is not all about facts. She gives importance to imagination, fancy, circus, and everything. So that's all about Charles Dickens' novel, Hard Times. The full title of the work is Hard Times for These Times. In the next class, we will discuss the biography of the writer, the poet, Seamus Heaney.